All right, so I'm here with Evan Ingerson. And Evan, can you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, happy to. Good to be here with you, Jared. My name's
Good to see
Evan.
you.
I'm a I'm a physical therapist, stationed out of Boulder, Colorado. I work for a company called Mend Physical Therapy. And a little background on myself: I was a competitive climber all through my youth, lifelong climber at this point. Competed through the youth circuit. Wasn't quite at that level to be a professional, make a living out of it. So luckily, I was able to become a physical therapist, and coming full circle, now I work primarily with rock climbers. So I'm still able to, make a living off of being in climbing, just on the other side of it.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing to have that ability. You would think maybe like 10 years ago to think that you could see only climbers or the majority of climbers as a clinician would be impossible. And now there's more than enough climbers to go around. So the topic we're going to go over, and this is something that's like close to my heart because it's one of the challenges that I feel after I see a climber. I feel like I can identify the impairments, their movement challenges. I can diagnose and solve these problems. And then the art of returning back to climbing is a huge challenge and a thorn in my side of the ability to figure that out. And so you put together an article which I'm quite impressed on, and it's dense. There's a lot in there that goes in depth into how climbers can get back on the wall. And obviously, the goal of this discussion here is to share your wisdom, share your knowledge. But yeah, tell us a little bit about in general the kind of article you put together and your thoughts on it, and then we'll dive into some of the specifics.
hmm So just like you, there is an art and a science to returning climbers back to their sport, and it's particularly difficult because we know the psych level is super high with climbers, and we can get a little ahead of ourselves. I think I was just tired as a PT having other healthcare providers drive the car in any way with returning my climbers to climbing. And so we see kind of two ends of the spectrum where a lot of doctors, physicians, people who are not very familiar, even PTs who are not very familiar with climbing, they think one of two things. They think if you're going back to climbing, you're immediately going back to doing one arm pinky pull ups and crushing 513D, because that's what rock climbing is. Or they they kind of overestimate how hard we're actually doing things when we get back to climbing. And also they underestimate how easy climbing can be when we do it right. And so for an experienced climber, getting on a gym 5'7", 5'8" is pretty darn easy, and it can be slabby and it can be very, very light on your tissues. And so to be able to walk that line of, the knowing that it can be really easy for those climbers, and it's not also extremely challenging. As people who understand climbing a little bit better, we can kind of use our art and science to be able to find the right, basically, dosage of returning to climbing for them. And it takes a lot of understanding of the sport, and it also takes a lot of practice. And so, you and I both know we spend a lot of time talking about and walking people through their return to climbing programs. So the things that I have seen missing in other return to climbing programs are any kind of systemization about it, because it's very difficult to systematize the return to climbing. And, we just don't have a ton of good research on climbing in general, but we do have some good research on other overhead sports, kind of where the money is: baseball players, tennis players, volleyball, things that are a bit more established that have research on them. We can extrapolate from those studies and apply it. And so, yeah, I don't know if there's anywhere in particular you want to start, or we can just jump on in.
Well, let's jump on in, and you can, people here are listening, they're also viewing because this will be available to view as well. So I encourage you on the podcast. We'll link the in the show notes the YouTube link to see the video because I think it's very helpful, and we'll also link the article. But let's dive into maybe some of the key topics in this article, because if we were to do an entire discussion that covered everything, this would be like 4 or 5 hours. This would be a course, right? This would be a full day course on how to return to climbing. And so, what are the key kind of topics you want to hit, and then we'll talk about those in depth as we go.
Yeah, I could spend all day talking about this stuff. So the big things that we'll pay attention to are going to be how to measure and systematize your return to climbing. We're going to talk about different considerations for like wall type and hold grip type and how those affect your rehab and return to climbing. Um, and we'll also cover how to progress. So when you are returning to climbing, is it okay to progress, or do we want to regress or keep it at the same level? And we'll also talk about things like, maybe how to wean off taping when you're climbing, how to get more comfortable taking lead falls or bouldering falls. And then we'll go over a lot of little tips about returning to climbing, such as, do I go in the gym or do I go outdoors? How do I get the most out of my return to climbing experience and to be safe and not be stuck in these certain boxes that we tend to stick ourselves into? And so really, the biggest thing is that it is challenging to quantify and systematize our return to climbing. So if you are a runner and you have returned to running from an injury, or if you've just gotten into running from off the couch, it's pretty darn easy. You think about your distance, you think about your pace, and maybe you think about your incline. So these really easy things that are very easy to quantify. With climbing, we have to think about a lot of different things. We have to think about the wall. So is it an overhang? Is it a slab? Is it vertical? Of course, we have to think about the grade, which, as we know, is super duper subjective. We need to think about the number of boulders or sport pitches that we're doing, but also, some boulders are 3 times as long as other boulders. Some sport pitches are 3 times as long as other sport pitches. So how long each of them are, the style, is it more static? Is it more dynamic? The hold type, is it more crimpy? Is it a crimp ladder, or is it a slopey, stabby, smeary, slabby, smeary, chimney, mantley, techie type of climb? So all these things we need to take into consideration. And so the best thing we can do to simplify it and quantify it is think about the difficulty of the climb, the grade, and the number of climbs that you're doing. And all those other things we take into consideration, but we can't overcomplicate things. And so I call this total load. And that is really the number of climbs that you're doing based on the difficulty of those climbs. So as a really easy example, if you climb a V1, you can give that 1 point. And if you climb a V2, you give that 2 points. And if you climb 2 V2s, you give that 4 points, and on and on. Of course, with the
And so this
Yosemite,
is just a
yeah,
pause for a moment. You've like identified, and this is for if someone is watching, it's also in the article, but you've like basically tagged based on the grade of climbing, it gets a certain point level. So that's like a number that you've kind of set and kind of come up with. Is that correct?
yep, exactly. Just as a way to demonstrate that if you're getting back into climbing and you're doing all V1s, it's going to be a very different experience than doing all V4s. And also, if you're 2 people are climbing V4s, but one is climbing twice as many, obviously those are going to be different loads on our tissues as well.
And this is the total load, and this is the basically so you can consider taking into account both the volume and the intensity, or kind of walk me through that, how a climber can piece this all together for their program.
Exactly. So the total load is the difficulty or the intensity or the grade and the volume, the number of climbs that you're doing. And so this is just a way we can calculate how much load we're putting on our tissues that are healing or recovering from taking a break from climbing. And so if you reference the article, I make it maybe you could say a little bit more complicated so that it can be very precise. And so if you want to go with a really precise version, go with what's on the article and you can track it and calculate it yourself. If you want to be a little bit more broad, there are ways we can just kind of simplify it a bit. So to simplify it, let's just go with the V grade system because that's nice and easy. If you climb 4 V1s, you can call that 4 points because each V1 is worth 1 point and you're doing 4 of them and you're going to end up with 4 points. And then if you do 2 V2s, that's also going to be 4 points. So you 2 points per V2 and you've done 2 of them, that's 4 points. And from there, of course, you can go on and add more climbs at more grades, and you can come up with a single number that is your total load for that climbing session. And so
And
you
this
can
is
get to,
just this is
yeah,
just a climber kind of arbitrarily like setting a baseline and saying I'm going to put points on these levels. Versus what you have in the article, you have no, these are the specific points that you've kind of lined out.
correct. Yeah. Well, so the article just has different point values kind of based on what I think are equivalent. And so, something like a V1 I've assigned as 2 points, and a 5.7 I've assigned as three, just based on the number of moves that you're doing and the difficulty of those moves. So again, and of course the points go up and up as the grade goes up. And so as you climb more and more, you basically accumulate more points as you do this. And this can be a way to measure your starting point, but really what we want to do is we want to give it a single number so that we know what we can do safely next time. If we need to progress, we know that we can progress and how much we want to progress. So we just want to quantify things as much as possible.
I mean, that's amazing because it's really hard, as you mentioned. There's all those variables that come into climbing. And I know, a slopey V5 is different than a crimpy V5, right? But having this idea of like getting that set volume and intensity and this baseline number to build off of and using a point system, I think that's quite brilliant. And it does make the art a little bit more of a science. It gives those numbers, which I think is quite helpful.
Absolutely. And, as climbers, we tend to be a little nerdy and a little bit puzzle driven. And so usually I find climbers pick up on this pretty well. And, I've had everything from people writing it down on paper every time to having their full spreadsheet at home that they reference. So we can get super nerdy with it. But really what we need is just some kind of baseline. Just like runners have their pace and their mileage, we need something to quantify to measure how much we're doing.
All right. So let's say a climber goes through, they arbitrarily assign points or they use your system or whatever it is. They have their baseline. They're like, okay, this is my volume and intensity. So where do they go from there?
So now we want to know, is it safe to progress and how much can we progress? And so those following along with the video will see what we call the soreness rules. I like to keep it nice and simple and just call them the red light, yellow light, green light system. And so this is based off of some of the research we have with return to sports for various injuries. And so basically what it is you pay attention to the symptoms that you currently have, how often those symptoms come up and how intense the pain is that you're feeling. And then you go do your climbing session at a level that you've discussed with your healthcare provider. And then you pay attention to how you feel after the session. Oftentimes, things will feel really good during the session. We get warmed up, we're in the gym, we're psyched, and you feel better than your tissues are actually feeling on the inside. So paying attention to after the climbing session, and then especially the next day. A lot of tissues don't tell us their true feelings until the next day. And so paying attention to that, you can then consider, am I feeling better than I was the day before? Am I feeling the same, or am I feeling worse than I was the day before? So if you're feeling worse, if you have more pain, higher intensity, more often throughout the day, we'll call that a red light. And if you get a red light, you want to take an extra day off. I already recommend taking a day off in between climbing sessions when you're returning to climbing. And you're going to drop one level. And one level will depend on whether you're returning from an injury or from just a break from climbing. But I like to have that cut off as if you're returning from an injury, one level is going to be 10 to 15% per week. And that's going to be of your total load. And then if you're returning just from a break from climbing because you took time off, you can go ahead and progress more at 20% of your total load. So you climbed and you're feeling worse the next day. That's going to be your red light. You're going to take an extra day off and drop your total load. If you are feeling the same as you were before, not better, not worse, that's going to be a yellow light. Proceed with caution. Keep things at the same total load. And if you are feeling better the next day, symptoms are less intense, less frequent, that's a green light, and you can progress your total load, typically by about 10 to 15% per week as you're getting back from an injury.
And this total load is really that number that we were talking about, that volume and intensity that you've assigned, a route or a boulder problem to a specific number. And they're like, this is my baseline where I'm at. That's the total load, correct?
Yep, exactly. So if your total load calculated out to be 60 points because of how many climbs you did and how difficult it was, then if you're going to increase, by 10%, then you're going to add 6 points. If you increase by 20%, you're going to add 12 points. So that and that 12 points you can calculate based on the number of climbs you do and the difficulty of those climbs.
I mean, I love this. It gives it definitely gives a systematic approach. And, like I said, this has always been my crux of rehabilitation is like, all right, well, I have certain protocols and return to climbing components, but nothing as, I'm obviously going to now be using this article to refer patients to, but nothing as thorough as this. So it's not that simple though, right? Obviously this is like 1/8 of the article. Like there's a lot more to it, but this seems like the heavy hitting part. So what's next? Like a climber comes in, they've identified their total load, they've figured out based on the soreness rules how to, progress, regress, or stay status quo. Like what else is important when a climber is returning back? What else is helpful to know?
Yeah, I think that's a good point that you bring up, that if you get one thing out of this, it's going to be calculate your total load, however you end up doing that, if you want to be really exact about it or more general, and progress smartly based off of your total load using the red light, yellow light, green light system. That's the most important thing above all else. But of course, we have to get a little bit more complicated because we're climbers and we like doing that, and because it really does matter. And so the hold type you're using does matter based on different types of injuries. And so if you have a pulley injury, you are more likely to get aggravated by crimping, particularly small crimps or crimps where you're actually grabbing in the half or full crimp position, as opposed to some kind of lumbrical strain or a problem with a flexor tendon where you might be more aggravated by a pocket or a sloper, and crimps will actually maybe not be as aggravating for you. So these are other things that you and your healthcare provider can identify. I go into a lot of detail in the article about the things to consider for each injury. But my recommendation for this is if you are climbing a type of climb that is particularly challenging for your injury, go ahead and double the point value for calculating your total load. So if I have a pulley injury and small crimps are the thing that are going to aggravate me the most, if I do a V4 that is very crimpy, I'm going to count that as double points compared to a normal V4 that might be slopey, because we know it's just going to put more stress on those tissues in particular. And there are considerations all over the body that I go into in the article, but just in general, we need to pay attention to not all hold types being created equal for the injury that you have.
Yeah, and I love that because you're still using the same systematic framework, but now you're taking into account the hold, and that seems like a almost like a protection to make sure that climbers aren't kind of cheating the system and being like, all right, I'm going to do very small, crimpy V5s and stack those up when they should actually, be dialing back a little bit because they're crimping and stressing their tissues. So I love that. What
Yeah.
other considerations? So there's, the hold type that's important, when climbers are progressing. I know in the article you talked about shoulder spheres. I thought that was quite a cool concept. Can you go a little bit more in depth into that?
Yeah. So when we're talking about fingers and shoulders, those make up the majority of climbing injuries across the board. And so we want to be really careful with how we use our fingers and our shoulders as well. What it tends to be with most shoulder injuries is that the farther away from your body you are reaching, the more challenging it is on your shoulder. It's not just a matter of reaching overhead is more challenging than grabbing out to the side. Sometimes it's actually just the opposite. But I've kind of developed a little bit of a system where you can think about your shoulders as spheres. And so if you are following along with the video, you'll see this little GIF I made. At home, if you're listening on the podcast, just think of doing a snow angel with your arms, and your arms will extend a certain amount away from your body, whether they're at your side or over your head or down below. When we're recovering from a shoulder injury, we want to make it systematic and progressive as well. And so my recommendation is to break it up into different levels, and we can achieve those different levels over different weeks. And so the first sphere, that I call it, of your shoulder is, if you're recovering from a shoulder injury and you're returning to climbing, only reach as far as your elbow can reach. And so this is a pretty small window, but think about climbing. If you're on a hold and let's say you're matched on a hold, you got both feet on the wall, and you're going to reach up with your arm. If you can't reach the next hold with your elbow, then you can't grab that hold. You can only grab the holds that your elbow could touch or that are closer to your body than your elbow.
I love it. I
Hopefully,
love it.
hopefully
People
that
with a
makes
large
sense.
large ape index may be thankful for some of these rules, but yeah, that's
Exactly. Yep.
great. Okay, that makes sense. And so that's like in your GIF. Is it GIF or GIF? GIF? I think it's GIF.
Oh man, I'm
I
gonna
have no
win.
idea.
I'm gonna win some people and lose some people. I'm GIF all the way.
Yeah,
I
I,
think it's
I
GIF,
I
but
actually have no idea. But in this animated image that you have, I could see
exactly.
that is that green area. So basically, that's that first sphere.
Yep, exactly. I've divided it into a green sphere, a yellow sphere, and a red sphere based on the challenge. And so that first level, or the green sphere, is what you can reach with your elbow. The second sphere is what you can reach with your wrist. So it gets a little bit easier to conceptualize, because you can just reach for a hold, and if you can touch it with the base of your wrist, then you can grab it. And if you can't, then you can't grab it. And then the third sphere, the most challenging one, is if you can touch it with basically the base of your fingers. So not your fingertips, but the base of your fingers. So if you can touch your whole palm to the hold, then you can grab it. Another thing to think about is that, you're not being static as you're climbing. Move your body, rotate your hips, pull your body up a little bit more. You'll be able to reach pretty far without having to reach your shoulders out too far. But the idea is to just decrease the stress on your shoulders initially and increase it systematically.
Yeah, and this also encourages almost like some climbing movement drills that will allow body torsion to make it so climbers can reach the holds, right? You can rotate your torso, your thoracic spine, your hip to try and get that extra leverage. And one question on the spheres. So is this something that you had come up with, or was there something you derived it from, just for out of interest?
Yeah, um, as far as I know, I came up with it just kind of on my own, just based on thinking about some of the biomechanics of the shoulders and what a lot of my climbers were complaining about when they came back. And so, I said I would initially say, okay, just go easy on reaching really far overhead. Well, eh, if you tell climbers you can't do one thing, they'll go as much as they can the other direction. And so now my climbers are reaching way out to the side, but not reaching overhead, because they're doing exactly what I told them, and ending up with shoulder pain because now they're doing this techie full reach out to the side move, pulling down, trying to rock their body over. And that is actually going to be more stressful on your shoulder than reaching over your head a small or medium amount. And so this comes a lot from what we know as physical therapists about shoulder biomechanics, and also just getting feedback from climbers that basically the biggest thing to pay attention to is pay attention to how far you're reaching in any direction, and keep it small, and then progress systematically.
I just love how this was developed by climbers just trying to climb and trying to push themselves, and this like trial and error process of like, nope, these are now the rules. And I love how it's so, this whole article, how it's so systematically laid out. So this helps. I get it. Now a climber's like, okay, I have a shoulder injury. I, can calculate my total load. I can go through and I can use these soreness rules to adjust. I can make some modifications based on different hold types or Gastons or whatever positioning. And for a shoulder in particular, you can use these spheres. What other concepts or ideas do you think are important for a climber just returning back to climbing?
Yeah. Well, first off, on the climbers trying to test the limits, some of the best research we have, some of the best uh, paradigm shifts we've had in the field of medicine have come from non-compliant patients. So don't get any ideas, but a lot of the things that we said, oh, you can't do this, and then people actually did it and were totally fine, ended up kind of changing our mindset on that. So, I'm sure climbers will continue to drive that moving forward. So the other things that I think are really helpful for people to think about when they're returning to climbing, we kind of touched on it earlier, is this does not have to be a time where you're just climbing easy stuff. There are a lot of things that you can focus on to make yourself a better climber, even if you're not pushing your grade limit. And so I like to say, don't slow down, change lanes. So if your climbing PT has limited you to being only able to do up to 10A and only 8 pitches in a session, you better make the most out of that, because it might get a little bit boring if you're a 512 climber. So this is where we can practice our climbing drills, whether it's quiet feet or flagging, rotating your hips, trying to move as statically or as slow as possible. So many drills that we can work on to keep you mentally engaged so that you're not totally bored and not, more likely to try that 10B, try that 10C and kind of justify it in your mind. But also so that you're just getting better at climbing. I've found a lot of times people who are experienced climbers who have been climbing for a long time, they have their injury and they're very, very bummed about it. And I help them reframe it into an opportunity. And a lot of times when they work on their foot technique, when they work on not readjusting on every single hold, when they focus on their breathing patterns while they're climbing, you can't do that stuff very well when you're climbing at your limit all the time, but you can develop new habits when you're climbing easy that will help you later as you climb harder and harder. So a lot of times people actually come back climbing stronger than they did after their injury because they've put in the time working on these foundational skills.
Yeah, and you have other, I mean, I think it's a great time to almost pivot and focus on like the I don't want to call them basics, maybe the fundamentals, right, of climbing.
Yeah.
And then you have these other tips which I love because I know that these tips have come from either experience, personal experience, or experience working with climbers. Using the gym as a tool, climbing with people who are good influences. Maybe talk about those as well because these are like those components that unless it's laid out, like you can do everything perfectly. You can have, the right total load, you can do all these numbers right, and you can have someone that's belaying you being like, "Oh, go for it, man. Go, go, go." And that may override everything that you had worked so hard to do. So, yeah, can you talk a little about the influence of others on returning to climbing, your friends, your buddies, and also, yeah, like being okay breaking some of the rules.
Yeah, totally. So using the gym as a tool is one of my favorite things. And so, I'm not going to yuck anyone's yum, but climbing on plastic indoors is not going to be hugely consequential. No one's checking your profile of like what climbs you did indoors. So we need to use the gym as a tool. And so don't be set on doing the yellow route exactly how the yellow route was designed to be done.
I
So
gotta
if you have
send it. I have to send that one. Yeah.
exactly right. All right, yeah. So if you have a pulley injury and you are supposed to avoid crimps and you get on the yellow route and it's nice, mini finger buckets and some slopers, and then there's this one crimp move that you just have to pull. It's a big move. There's no way around it. Don't just pull on it. Grab the pink route to the net, grab the pink hold to the right next door, or put your foot on the orange hold. That's, a really big hold that can help you get past this move really easily. Grab the quick draw or just jump off the wall and climb the bottom part again up until that crimpy move. So we need to be thinking about not being set on what the arbitrary rules are of the gym and thinking about it as a series of holds that you are using to get better, and whatever we need to do to avoid re-aggravating things and to help you systematically continue to increase the amount of climbing that you're doing. So break the rules, use extra footholds, take footholds away, try the same climb multiple times if you need. It doesn't matter. Nobody's tracking what you're doing, and it's really going to enhance your return to climbing experience. It's kind of fun sometimes to break the rules a bit. And then climb with people who are good influences. I mean, really what we know about behavioral science is that we don't make a lot of decisions on our own. We base it off of what other people around us are doing. And so climb with people who have your best interest in mind, the people who will encourage you to be smart, not the people who will encourage you to try a little bit harder all the time. And so I've literally had people forced people to break up with their climbing partners temporarily. We should just see other people for a little bit until I get back to it, and then they can get back to pushing it. But really, choose those people wisely, and likewise, don't be that guy for your friend who is returning from an injury.
Yeah, absolutely. What other kind of final thoughts? The article, first of all, anyone listening or watching, definitely check out the article because it is jam packed. But any kind of final thoughts or closing ideas or advice that you have as climbers are looking to get back to climbing?
Try to be as systematic as possible with what you're doing. And we all have different ideas of how to track things and what is systematic and what systems work for us, but have some way of systematizing things so you know where you are, and that will help you consider and change the trajectory of where you're going. So that's kind of the biggest thing. And just because you're injured doesn't mean you're not getting better at climbing. And so break the rules, focus on drills, focus on technique, use this as an opportunity to get better. And you know, keep the psych level in check, but kind of channel that psych into focusing on drills and fundamental movements. And just know that anytime we're taking time off of climbing, it sucks and we're not happy about it. But the important thing is to make this a life sport. Everyone has their different goals, but if we go too hard too fast, that road to recovery is not going to be a straight line. It's going to involve a lot of setbacks, and that's going to be more frustrating than taking it slow and progressing systematically. So know your own limits and make it systematic, and try to have as much fun with it as possible as you're doing that.
And Evan, where can people find you or where can they get in touch with you?
So you can, best way to get in touch is over email, actually. So you can email me at evan@mendcolorado.com. And you can find us at mendcolorado.com on the internet, on our website. There's a climbing page on there. And yeah, I'd love to get in touch and hear from you guys. And I love talking about this stuff. I love nerding out about this stuff. Check out the article because, like Jared said, there's a lot of density, and there are a lot of other things that we didn't touch on because we can spend hours and hours talking about this. But yeah, I'd love to hear from you guys.
Yeah, and this is a phenomenal resource. I know, Evan, you put a ton of time, years of experience into it, and then a ton of time compiling it. And so, for anyone listening, watching, big kudos, Evan, for putting this together. I think it's going to help a lot of climbers. And thanks for coming on and sharing this with us.
My pleasure.